Well, the January jobs report showed the labor market holding steady at the beginning of the new year. For more on those numbers, though, I do want to bring in the president and CEO of the Job Creators Network, Alfredo Ortiz. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon, Alfredo.
Good afternoon. Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
January was nothing short of what we'd call a blockbuster month for job growth. One key figure, though, to highlight is the labor force participation rate, which rose to 63.4%, matching the highest level on record. What does that mean for the U.S. labor market?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, for the party of doom and gloom, this was a bad week, and this report just kind of topped it off because it was an amazing report, 225,000 jobs, as you said, and these were great jobs. And that labor force participation rate, really fancy words for basically saying we got more people working than ever, really. And when you look at how that has actually moved, it was about 500,000 new workers were added to the January payrolls. Overall, though, since President Trump came in office, about 10 million folks have now been added to the labor force, which is an amazing number, and we need to see more of that. And when you think about that in retrospect too, relative to the baby boomers that are actually retiring, this is a great number because they're leaving the workforce, so we got to fill those spots back. And again, so we couldn't be more excited. But outside of the jobs number, Greta, the wage increases at the bottom half has also been tremendous at over 3%. So this is a great story. It's about jobs and wage growth, and we couldn't be happier at Job Creators.
Looking deeper into this report, you see the breakdown of which sectors had the most growth. Interesting for me to see the construction sector leading the way in January, a winter month. What can we attribute that to in January?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think first of all, we're seeing housing demand is really starting to hit. Housing permits continue to be up, and we're continuing to see these numbers continue to skyrocket.
Was the slight uptick in the unemployment rate seen in the January jobs report, rising slightly to 3.6%. But as you and I did talk about briefly, the labor force participation rate is still really high. Does it actually matter that the unemployment rate went a little bit higher?
Yeah, no, that actually really isn't as big of a factor. It really is the focus of the labor force participation rate. The fact that it ticked up 0.2 is actually a big deal because we want to see more people coming off the sidelines, getting back into the labor force. Since President Trump took office, we have about 10 million folks that have now been added to the labor force, which is a great number. And when you look at that uptick in the labor force participation rate, that's a great improvement because we also got to remember that you have people retiring, baby boomers are retiring, leaving the workforce. And so having that uptick was really a great thing. That unemployment rate just basically means we got more people looking for jobs that want to be working, that are excited about that. And we also have the wage growth. We can't forget about the wage growth, especially on the bottom half. That's growing at a couple of times, in some cases even 3 times faster than the top echelon of workforces. Yeah,
you mentioned that wage growth, and the January report showed wage growth continuing. Average hourly earnings rising 3.1% year over year. That beat economist expectations, and you've heard President Trump mention especially, hey, this is a blue-collar boom. President's economic advisor saying that, President himself saying that. How important really is that for the U.S. labor market to continue building strength?
Yeah, it really is. It's critical. I mean, we really are dependent. By the way, it really is small business owners are fueling a good chunk of this growth. Overall, small businesses across the country, about 30 million of them, they represent about 2/3 of that new job growth. So it's so important to continue to fueling, an economy that makes sense for small business owners. The low tax rate, the lower regulatory environment that President Trump really put in place pretty much since day one has really been critical for that. And one thing really quickly on the jobs number, because some people are hemming and hawing a little bit about the manufacturing job, we got to remember one thing that's happened during this time frame is the shutdown of the Boeing MAX 737. That really did impact the manufacturers, specifically with Boeing. Some of the job hit there, but also some of the related manufacturers and vendors that service Boeing. So that kind of makes sense when you think about it from that perspective. So outside of that, the numbers are great. And you mentioned before we got cut off there, the construction numbers. The construction numbers are great. Mortgage rates are at record lows, about 3.5, 3.6%. So housing permits are up, and just people are feeling great about the economy, feeling great about the future. A Gallup number that just came out said that 90% of the people are feeling good about their personal lives right now. That's an amazing number. And so, again, this was a bad week for the party of doom and gloom, unfortunately, between the impeachment acquittal, the State of the Union meltdown there by Pelosi, and now this jobs report. This was a bad week for the Democrats.
All right. right, Alfredo Ortiz, the president of the Job Creators Network. Thanks so much for joining us here on Wall to Wall to talk about the January jobs report.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Want to see more videos like this? Click on the link below and subscribe to One American News on YouTube. And call your cable provider and kindly demand that One American News is added to your lineup. Call and subscribe today.